to upload the session to the YouTube channel. So today is the June the 16th. This is ELT115 section 1, and we're going to start with a review of some of the contents. I'm going to good morning to the ones I didn't say hi. Isabel, Juan, Alfaro, Maria Fernanda, right? Barrera, Matias, Valentina. I think I didn't say hi to you. Axel. So, Matias, would you like to read the slide, please? Sorry, the questions are right here. Okay, Matias, would you like to read this slide? Matias? No.
Yes.
Okay.
Questions. What is this sound segmentation? Why is it useful? What does phonetics study? In what way? What is the speech chain? Is spelling consistent in representing the sound of the English language? How can we describe phonemes, vowel and consonant sounds?
Thank you so much, Matias. So these are the questions that we are going to cover. Some of them maybe you already know the answer to, but others, if you don't know the answer, hopefully the answer will be discussed here during the session, okay? So what is sound segmentation? Why is it useful? Sound segmentation, that we're going to refer to right now in the next slide, okay? Juan Alfaro, are you here? Could you read the slide, please, aloud?
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Sound segments. Knowing a language includes knowing the sounds of that language. Therefore, we're able to segment a continuous stream of speech into distinct parts and recognize the parts of the other words. In other words, everyone who knows a language knows how to segment sentences into words and words into sounds. Phonetics is the study of speech sounds.
Perfect. So sound segmentation is a skill that is taught to students at a very early age in English-speaking countries to teach them how to read, right? How to read. Sound segments or how to segment, right? It's important because when you listen to someone who is speaking in a language, you hear a long string of sounds. For example, right here. Therefore, we are able to segment a continuous stream of speech into distinct parts and recognize the parts in other words. It sounds like a long, very long strip, right? A string of sounds, right? But if we know a language, we can say, okay, therefore, that's one word. We, that's another. Are, that's another word. Able, another word. To, another word. Segment, another word. As an article. Continuous, right, as an adjective. Stream, as a noun. Of, preposition. Speech, that's so on and so forth, right? And how can we do that? Because in a sentence, someone who's reading this is reading this as just one long. We're not pausing, like we're not saying therefore. We are able to, right? We're not pausing to make it easier on the listener to identify individual words. So when we know a language, we're able to, for example, identify that in the word segment, segment, it's the verb, right? And segment is the noun, right? Segment is the action, to segment, to divide, right? And segment is the noun, like one segment or two segments. So going back to the point, I can identify the segment is a word because I can identify the initial sound s, and I can identify the final sound, which is t, right? Segment. So I can identify that this is the boundary for this word, the initial sound, and this is a final one. So this is the boundary. And then what comes after is a different word. Right? The same with the next one, distinct, right here. We can identify the initial sound, d, and we can identify the final sound, t. And then we can understand that these are the boundaries of this word. And whatever comes after, for example, parts, the p is a sound that does not belong to distinct, right? But it belongs to this new word. Okay, so that is sound segmentation, is the ability to divide a continuous string or stream of sounds into words, right? So let's take the last sentence or statement. Phonetics is the study of speech sounds. Phonetics is study of speech sounds. So we can understand that if we're not reading this and we're just listening to this, we can understand that phonetics is the first word. And phonetics starts with the sound and it ends with the sound s, right? Phonetics. Okay, so that sound segmentation is the ability to isolate or identify the words which are the sounds, sorry, the sounds which are or which make up words. And we can divide the words as well in an utterance or in a sentence, in a statement. This is very helpful, and it's what is called phonological awareness, right? And when you have this phonological awareness, you are able to identify, for example, the boundaries of words, when a word begins and when a word ends, and then when the next word begins and ends. It's called phonological awareness. So for example, the word nose, when you are able to identify the initial sound and the final sound, right? Nose, the final sound is s, initial sound is n. Do not get confused with this letter or grapheme, right? Nose. So you're able to understand what's the, as I said before, what's the initial position, nose, and the final one. You're also able to identify the vowel sound present here, O, which is a diphthong, right? You're able to identify the initial sound, and you can change it if you want, right? For example, instead of saying nose, you can change the initial sound for sh. You can say shows, nose. Okay, so the ability to identify the sounds and the corresponding symbols, right, representing the sounds, is what's called phonological awareness, right? And when you have developed phonological awareness, you are able to segment the sounds. You're able to play with the sounds, right? You can identify the beginning sound and the final sound, and you're able to replace a sound and change it for another one. That is very critical when you are learning to read in a language, right? For example, in Spanish, you were taught how to combine sounds, and in Spanish, they taught you when you were a child, la T con la A, and you were supposed to say ta, right? And the con la E, le, right? And you were combining these two sounds, and therefore, when you were taught how to read, you were taught how to recognize these sounds individually first, and then how to combine them. Even you were taught how to rhyme, right? For example, the word parts, right? And the word parts, which word rhymes with parts? Parts. You can add an here, by the way. I can think about the word dots, which rhymes with parts, right? Dots, which is the game, you know, the game which is called dardos, right? And when you throw this dots or lanza los dardos, dots, right? And when you were taught how to rhyme, you focused on the final sound, right? The final vowel sound, and the consonants in the end, right? Parts, dots. Just like when you say casa, taza. Casa, taza, right? Casa, taza. We focused on this last section of the word. So sound segmentation allows you, in other words, right, or to sum up, to identify the division of words, right, or the boundaries of words in a sentence. And also within the word, you're able to identify the individual sounds, right, the individual phonemes, vowel sounds or consonant sounds, and you're able to replace them, right? Like in the word nose, replace the first sound or initial sound for sh, as in shows. Okay, so that is sound segmentation, this ability to play around or identify sounds in a word and words in a sentence. Okay. Let's take a look at the identity of speech sounds. And Diane Bravo, are you here? Could you take care of this slide, please? Knock, knock. Diane, are you here? Let's take a look at the chat. Yes, Judith. During the after this first session, we're going to refer to tests. Okay.
Thank you.
Alrighty. So Diane does not seem to be here. She has not sent a message. So Maria Fernanda Barrera, is that right?
Yes, teacher.
All right. Could you read aloud this section, please?
Okay.
Thank you.
Identify identity of the speech sounds.
Yes.
Linguistic knowledge allows us to know non-linguistic differences in speech, such as individual pitch levels, rates of speech, cuts. I don't know how to say it. Cuts.
Coughs, yes, coughs.
The science of phonetic aims to describe all the sounds of all the world's language.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. So when we know a language, like when we know Spanish, right, or as we know English, first we're able to segment sounds, right, and we're able to listen to someone and understand, for example, in the word, I don't know, in Spanish, la casa es grande. La casa es grande has how many words? La casa es grande. It has 4, right? And or in English, it is a big house, right? It is a big house. We can understand if we know the language that the person is using 4 words in his statement. If we hear someone speaking in Greek, Japanese, Chinese, or any other languages, right, that we're not quite familiar with, probably we would not be able to number the words used, right? And we would not be able to identify when a word starts and when the next one starts. Also, when we know a language, right? When we know a language, we can understand even that there are some individual differences in terms of pitch, right? For example, someone speaking like this with a very high pitch. That would be a very high pitch, right? Not so high, but high. Or like this with a very low pitch. So because we know a language, we can understand people talking, even though the pitch levels vary or are quite different. We can understand someone who speaks very fast or someone who speaks very slow, like the character in Zootopia, right? The one in the DMV. We can understand someone who's coughing, right? Like, or someone who is even yawning. Right? When we know a language, we can filter these factors, right? And we can understand the message when we know a language. Of course, they interfere with comprehension, but usually when we know a language, we can separate this interferences, right, or these factors that affect communication. When we know a language, we can do that in English, we can do that in Spanish, right? Well, and in connection with phonetics deals with the description of sounds in general. Phonetics is not just about English, but it's about all the sounds that make up languages, right? World languages. So, sorry. So, in the following section, I'm going to ask Marieta's help. Marieta, are you there? Could you help me out with this slide, please? Marieta, are you there? Marieta. Let's take a look at the chat. Chat, no message. Okay. Any volunteer?
Me.
Thank you so much. Isabel, go for it, please.
Yes. The phonetic alphabet. In 1888, the International Phonetic Alphabet, IPA, was invented in order to have a system in which there was a one-to-one correspondence between each sound in language and its phonetic symbol. Someone who knows the IPA knows how to pronounce any word in any language.
Thank you, Isabel. So the different variations of sounds in languages made it very difficult for linguists to describe sounds. Remember that some languages have been discovered in several places of the earth, right, that were not known to human beings, right? Spoken languages that were present in some, tribes in the Amazons or in Africa, etc., etc. So the point is that in 1888, the International Phonetic Association created this International Phonetic Alphabet, which contains symbols or phonetic symbols to represent sounds. And theoretically, if you know how to pronounce all the symbols present in the International Phonetic Alphabet, you should be able to produce any sound in any language. Okay, so phonetics deals in general with all kinds of sounds present in all kinds of languages, right? That's the broadly speaking the subject of phonetics. Now, phonetics deals with sounds in different stages. When sounds are produced, when sounds are transmitted, right, and when sounds are received or perceived. When sounds are articulated, that's what we're dealing with different sub-branches of phonetics, and this is something that we're going to see is connected with the speech chain, okay? The speech chain. Sorry, the first one is a C-H-I-N, speech chain. Okay, so before referring to the speech chain, we're going to refer to the different sub-branches of phonetics, which is something that we already talked about, but we're reviewing now. Natalia Correa, are you here?
Yes, teacher.
All right, Natalia, do you mind taking care of this slide?
Okay.
Thank you.
Acoustic phonetics focuses on the physical properties of the sounds of language, such as duration, frequency, and intensity of sounds. Auditory phonetics focuses on the perception of speech by the auditory system. How I say that word?
Articulatory.
Articulatory. Phonetics focuses on how the vocal tract produces the sound of language.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Okay.
So we have three sub-branches here: acoustic phonetics, auditory phonetics, and articulatory phonetics. So the last one, articulatory phonetics, focuses on how sounds are articulated. When the signals are sent by the brain towards the muscles in your mouth, and they are told what to do with the muscles, like push the tongue upwards or downwards or backwards, or move the upper teeth and touch the bottom lips, etc., etc. That is what goes on when we deal with articulatory phonetics, is the study of how sounds are articulated with the different articulators, right? And which is mainly the basis of this course, is to describe how vowel sounds are produced and which organs are used to produce them. When you speak, for example, now that I'm speaking, I'm articulating, right, these sounds with the organs in my mouth and nose. And then, I mean, if we were facing each other, this airstream that comes from the lungs, right? That's why it's pulmonary, because it comes from the lungs, right? And it leaves the oral cavity, right? It leaves the oral cavity. That's why it's called egressive, because it goes out, egressive, of the oral cavity. So this pulmonary and egressive airstream goes out in the form of sound waves, right? And these sound waves travel, right, in an environment. It could be a very large room or a very small room. It could be on the street. I mean, it could be in an environment in which other elements may affect the quality of that sound. The sound waves, right, are measured by a discipline which is called acoustic phonetics. So acoustic phonetics measures the physical properties of the sounds. Which physical properties? Duration, frequency, intensity, right? And these might be represented, the sounds might be represented in visual representations, right? Such as diagrams, right? And all sorts of visual material. So the sound waves can be represented by these studies carried out by acoustic phonetics. And these sound waves reach your ears, right? Reach the listener's ears. Now, how do you interpret these sounds? How does your brain interpret these sound waves that are decoded, what we say in Spanish, decodificadas? How do you understand this spoken speech or message? That's what auditory deals with. Auditory phonetics, or, right, auditory phonetics deals with how we perceive the sounds through the auditory system. Okay, and that is something that is dealt with by not only the auditory phonetics field, but also with other disciplines, right? Okay, and how is this connected with the speech chain? Well, basically, a speaker produces a thought. The thought from the brain sends signals, right, to your muscles. The muscles are activated and articulate a sound. The sound is produced. This is studied by articulatory phonetics, right? And then the sound leaves the oral cavity in the form of sound waves. When you speak, there is some feedback because you listen to yourself, right? You listen to yourself, and then you can rephrase. For example, if I'm giving an instruction, and then you're not understanding, I can see your face. I could see your facial movements. Let's suppose that I'm seeing you in a classroom, right? In a face-to-face session. I can see your facial movements. I can listen to myself. I can perceive if you're not understanding or not, and then I might be changing the message or the instructions again. So I'm getting some feedback here. And so these sound waves, which travel through the air, is what exactly they travel through the air here, right? Which is something that is dealt with by the acoustic phonetics, right? Acoustic phonetics. And then finally, the sound waves reach the listener's ears, right? And this is what the auditory phonetics deals with, because not all the brains understand the sounds in the same way. Not everyone perceives the sounds in the same way, right? That's why the auditory phonetics deals with the way or the how we perceive sounds with different characteristics, like high pitch sounds, low pitch sounds, sounds with more intensity or less intensity. Okay, so that's the explanation of how the speech chain, which is the production of sounds from a speaker up to where the listener receives the speech sounds, right? And sounds are interpreted, is connected with the different sub-branches of phonetics. Okay. Now, there's another question here, which is spelling consistent in representing the sounds of the English language? Spelling or orthography, right? Is it consistent? I mean, can we rely on spelling? Can we say, okay, this letter is always going to be, consistent. We can always expect the same sound from this letter or grapheme. Or can we say that this letter will always be consistent? Can we always expect the same sound from this grapheme in English? Okay, that is what we're going to refer to in this slide. Can we have another volunteer? Axel, are you here? Axel Casino? Mr. Casino, are you here? Axel Casino Mejias, are you here? Let's take a look at the chat. No, Axel, I don't know if the rest of it. So while Axel can fix that. Okay, Axel, thanks so much for your answer. Thank you for answering through the chat. Can we have Cristobal Contreras? Cristobal, I think you already read, didn't you?
No, I didn't.
Okay, go on, please. Cristobal, go on.
Okay. The phonetic alphabet. Spelling
Yes.
or orthography does not consistently represent the sound of language. Some problem with ordinary spelling. 1. The same sound may be represented by many letters or combination of letters. He, people, K, believe, says, machine, Cesar, sees, see, amueva, I don't see.
Okay.
2. The same letter may represent a variety of sounds. Father, village, badly, made, many.
Thank you so much, Cristobal.
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk about spelling or orthography, right, the way in which we write letters or words is not consistent in English, right? And here we have two problems that Cristobal has read. The first one is that the same sound may be represented by many different letters or a combination of letters. For example, in the examples below, we have the sound or the phoneme E. And we have, for example, he. We have people. We have key. We have believe, sees, machine, Caesar, see. The same sound E represented by different spellings. Okay. For example, here we have the letter E, the combination EO, the combination E, Y, the combination I, E, E, I, A, E, E, A, double E, O, E. So different spelling for the same sound. And why? And that creates difficulty when learning the language. In the second example, read by Cristobal, he read the same letter may represent a variety of sounds. The same letter. Let's say identify the letter. Letter A, 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 A. So we have the same letter. But when we say father, we're using a long A. When we're saying village, we're using a short lax E. When we're saying badly, we're using a trap. When we're saying made, we're using a diphthong. And when we're saying many, we're using a monophthong here. So that's another problem. We have the same letter, but we have a variety of sounds representing that letter, a variety of phonemes. Okay? Again, we have the same spelling, but we have a different combination of sounds. Okay, so let's take a look at other problems that we can find in terms of spelling or orthography in English. We can divide this, so we can have 2 volunteers. For the first part, we can have Javiera de la Fuente, and for the next one, we can have Pia Cerda. So Javiera and Pia, are you here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, so can you take care of the first one, please?
A combination of letters may represent a single sound. Should character Thomas either physical road code deal? A single letter may represent a combination of sounds. I don't know how to say this word.
Xerox.
Xerox.
Xerox. Mm-hmm.
¿Sigo?
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Hello.
Some letters in a word may not be produced at all. A noun word remain rising and pterodactyl, lamb, chord, physical, right, could not. And there may be not a letter to represent a sound that occurs in a word. Could use.
Thanks so much. So let's take a look at these cases, right, in which a spelling is not consistent. A combination of letters may represent a single sound. So if we take a look at this combination, we have right, SH, we have CH, TH, EI, PH, we have GH, we have OA, and we have EA. So we have a combination of letters. And if we think about the first one, we need to think about the sound represented by the symbol, sh, right? Shoot. So the combination of 2 letters is only one sound, sh, right? The combination of these 2 letters is one sound, ch, sorry, k. Okay, character, okay? One sound, 2 letters. 2 letters here, one sound, t, Thomas. 2 letters, one sound, E, either. 2 letters, one sound, physics. two letters here and one sound, rough, rough. Okay, here we have two letters, and we have the diphthong. Remember, a diphthong is seen as one sound unit, right? O and E, deal. Okay, so that is something that we need to consider when we're learning this language. Is sometimes a combination of two letters, maybe one sound in English. Okay, and in the case number 4, Xerox, if you focus on the last one, Xerox, it's actually two sounds. It's a combination of two sounds. Just like when you think about exception, right? Excel, excellent, X, X, X is basically the letter X, right? Excellent, Xerox, okay? So one letter, two sounds, okay? In the case number 5, in the case number 5, is some sounds, some letters, I'm sorry, are not pronounced. For example, in the case of autumn or autumn, the final letter is not pronounced. Autumn, right? N is not produced. In the second case, we say sword, sword, sword. We don't produce this w, right? Sword. In the next one, what do you think? We say resign, resign. Which letter is not really pronounced when we say resign? Exactly. And when we say pterodactyl? Exactly. When we say lamb, lamb. Exactly. How do you think this word is pronounced?
With a long O, maybe?
With a long O, exactly. And we have a long O, and how do you read this?
Corpse, maybe? We didn't say the R.
Let's take a look at just for fun, right?
Cool. 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 Cool.
I don't know if you're listening and seeing this.
Cool.
Core.
Cool.
So there are many letters here that are not pronounced, right? Many letters that are not pronounced in this particular case. I'm going back to the okay. For example, this is not pronounced. This is not pronounced, right? What about the following? Which letter do you think is not pronounced?
Letter P.
Letter P, perfect. What about the next one?
The E.
The E.
And the W.
And the W, perfect. What about the last one?
K.
The K. Exactly, not. So that's another thing that we need to consider. In the English language, some letters are not pronounced. Okay, so that it's a very interesting feature of this language. Sometimes, as we can read in number 6, maybe there's no letter to represent a sound that occurs in the word. For example, when we say cute or use, right? The final sound is not, the final letter is not produced, right? Cute, use. Now, but if we consider the sound here, right? We're talking about E. Because we're not considering this a diphthong. U is not a diphthong. U, right? So we need to think about the semi-vowel or glide. And this is not present as a letter in these words. So this is why spelling or orthography does not consistently represent the sounds of the English language. Because sometimes one sound may be represented by many letters, or the same letter may represent a variety of sounds. Sometimes two letters can be represented by one sound, or one letter can be represented in two sounds, right? Sometimes letters are not pronounced. So that is something to consider when we are learning and teaching this language. Okay. Now we talked about vowel sounds at the beginning of the semester, and we started talking about consonant sounds, right? And in consonant sounds, we talked that were described using at least 3 different criteria. One of them was place of articulation. And if you remember, the place of articulation is the where, usually the where the articulators were positioned. Usually the tongue, sometimes the teeth, sometimes the lips, to produce or articulate the sounds. Let's take a look at this slide, which talks about place of articulation. Anyone is volunteering? Can I ask Sebastián Camaño? Sebastián, are you there?
Yes.
Okay, can you take care of this slide, please?
Okay.
Thank you.
Consonants. Place of articulation. Consonants are sounds produced with some restriction or closure in the vocal tract. Consonants are classified based in part on where in the vocal tract the airflow is being restricted. The place of articulation. The major places of articulation are bilabial, labiodental, interdental, alveolar, palatal, velar, uvular, and glottal.
Thank you so much, Sebastián. So if you remember, vowels are not produced with restriction or closure in the vocal tract. Vowels are, in general, are modulated by the lips, the tongue, but there's no restriction, as it happens with the consonant sounds. The consonant sounds are articulated with some restriction or something affecting the airflow coming from the lungs, right? When we talk about place of articulation, we refer to how the articulators are positioned to produce the sound. So we talked about bilabial sounds, labiodentals, interdentals, alveolars, palatals, velar. We did not talk about uvular sounds, and we talked about glottal sounds, right? So we mainly talked about the ones mentioned before, except uvular, right? And as a reminder, we talked about these concepts, right? Bilabial, Bastian, can you take care of this slide, please? Bastian?
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Consonants, place of articulation. Bilabials. PBM, produced by bringing both lips together. Labiodentals, F and B, produced by touching the bottom lip to the upper teeth. Interdentals, I don't remember what that sounds. Produced by putting the tip of the tongue between the teeth.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you, Bastian. So these are three places of articulation. Bilabials. Just a very brief comment, Bastian. When we read the letters, we say P, B, and M. But when we read the sounds, or phonemes, we say P, B, and M. The letters F, the letter V, but the sounds F, V. Okay? And how can we know when we're talking about sounds or phonemes and not letters? When they are enclosed in slashes or in brackets, we're talking about the sounds or the phonemes. So this one becomes B, and this one becomes F, okay? So because these ones are the sounds or phonemes, right? And that's how we can recognize them. And these are just letters, right? And letters can be read as P, B, M, F, V, as when we're reading the alphabet. So bilabials produced with the two lips put together. That's when we say pen, ben, and men, right? Labiodentals, when we produce them, we put the upper teeth touching the bottom lip. We say fan, van, right? Fan, van. And the interdentals, th and th, as when we say, for example, thanks, right? And the, as when we say, for example, they. We insert the tip of the tongue in between the teeth, right? So we have the upper teeth, the bottom teeth, right? And we insert the tip of the tongue. For example, and why is it important to know the way in which sounds are articulated in a language? Because sometimes they may sound very similar to the sounds we make in our own native language, in Spanish, but sometimes they're not exactly the same. For example, when I think about the alveolar sounds, okay, and I think about this sound, T, okay, T. And I think about the word, for example, in English, tan, or the word tool, okay, tan, tool, ton, okay, ton. This sound, this initial sound is alveolar because the tip of the tongue touches the alveolar ridge. Now, when I think about the same letter in Spanish, for example, I say tiene, or todo, okay. When I think about the letter D, right, and I say, for example, den, I say dust, and I say dim, and I think about the same letter, right, in Spanish, and I say, for example, dado, or diente. And I compare the position of the tongue when I say, for example, den, dust, and I say dado, diente. In my case, my tongue is not in the same position. When I say den, dust, the tip of the tongue is touching the alveolar ridge. And when I say dado and diente, my tongue is behind the upper teeth. It's behind the upper teeth. Sometimes even touching the upper and bottom teeth, but usually it's right behind the upper teeth. Okay, and it's the same letter. I mean, we have this letter in English and we have this letter in Spanish. And sometimes people may think that they are pronounced in the same way, but they are not. So that's quite tricky, because if the letter exists and the sound sounds very similar, but it's not exactly the same. Okay, so when you're saying a word that contains this letter, the tip of the tongue should go to the alveolar ridge, right behind the upper teeth. And in Spanish, I guess it's different for you as well. Okay. Now, when we talked about alveolars, we said that in all of them, the tip of the tongue was raised towards the alveolar ridge, and but they are not exactly the same. They are not exactly similar. T, d, and n could be considered one group, but s and z have some special or specific features that make them different. And l and is another group that also have some specific characteristics, right? We're going to have a break now, and I will see you in 10 minutes to revise again alveolar sounds, and then we're going to start reviewing the concepts of manner of articulation for this new beginning of this week. So if you're okay with that, we can have this 10-minute break. And after the break, we can continue reviewing alveolars and other places of articulation. Are you all right with the break now?
Okay.
Alrighty, so I'll see you in 10 minutes.